On an ordinary afternoon in a quiet city neighborhood, what began as a routine police encounter spiraled into a shocking moment that no one on the scene could have imagined. The flashing lights, the loud commands, and the confusion in the air painted a picture that has become all too familiar across the country. A black woman stood surrounded by officers, accused of resisting arrest, her voice drowned out by the chaos. But what these officers didn't realize was that the woman they were handling so aggressively wasn't just another passerby caught up in a misunderstanding. She was someone with power, influence, and authority at the very highest level. She was the director of the FBI. It all started with a traffic stop that seemed routine. A miscommunication between the woman and the officers escalated quickly. The body language of the officers grew tense, their words sharper, and within moments, the situation turned physical. Neighbors stepped outside, recording on their phones, unsure of what they were witnessing. The woman, calm but firm, tried to identify herself, but her voice was overshadowed by the forceful commands. The crowd could feel the tension rising, every second bringing more intensity. For the officers, it was just another example of someone resisting. For the bystanders, it was another painful scene that echoed stories they had heard too often. But what nobody could predict was the weight of the truth that was about to come crashing down on everyone involved. This wasn't simply about a traffic stop gone wrong. This was about mistaken assumptions, power dynamics, and the dangerous consequences of not pausing to listen before acting. The woman's strength and composure stood out. Even as the situation grew more heated, she carried herself differently, as if she knew something that others did not. Her calmness wasn't fear, it was certainty. And yet, the officers didn't see it. They were too focused on what they believed was happening, too caught up in the moment to realize the magnitude of their mistake. Every move they made was pushing them closer to a decision that could not be undone. And then, just as the situation seemed at its peak, one small detail, a badge tucked away, an ID falling to the ground, a whispered recognition from someone, and the crowd threatened to flip the entire story upside down. Who exactly was this woman, and how would the officers react once the truth came out? The answer was about to leave everyone stunned. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the woman's wallet slipped from her hand and hit the pavement, the plastic ID card sliding out just enough for a curious bystander to notice. Someone in the crowd leaned in closer, squinting at the words stamped across the card. The faint reflection of a federal seal caught the light of the flashing police car. For a split second, the bystander's expression changed, a mix of disbelief and recognition. But before they could say anything, an officer kicked the wallet aside, too preoccupied to notice what it revealed. The tension thickened in the air, the kind of silence that feels heavy even with voices shouting around it. Up until this moment, the woman had remained calm, measured, almost as if she knew this scene would one day play out. She didn't raise her voice, didn't panic. Her quiet confidence was striking, especially for someone surrounded by armed officers. It wasn't the reaction of someone who felt powerless. It was the poise of someone who had seen more than most, who carried secrets larger than this entire block, someone who understood what power really meant. The officers, however, only saw what they wanted to see. To them, she was just another civilian refusing to cooperate. What they didn't know was that this woman had spent her career walking into rooms where silence followed her name. She was no stranger to scrutiny, no stranger to danger, and no stranger to the weight of responsibility. As the director of the FBI, she had been briefed on national security threats, led high-profile investigations, and overseen cases that shaped the country. She had seen some of the darkest sides of human behavior. Yet here she was reduced to a stereotype, treated as if her voice didn't matter. The irony was almost too heavy to bear. This wasn't just about mistaken identity. It was a reflection of how quickly perception can overshadow truth. Every bystander with a phone knew this was no ordinary arrest, even if they didn't yet understand why. Some whispered, some shouted at the officers to stop, while others simply stared in disbelief, waiting for the moment when the truth would explode into the open. The woman's eyes stayed locked on the lead officer. Unwavering, steady it was. Almost as if she was silently daring him to look closer, to actually see her. But he didn't. His focus was locked on control, on authority, on proving that his command could not be questioned. The power struggle was no longer just physical, it was symbolic. Two forces, one official, one hidden, clashing on a stage bigger than either of them could have anticipated. And then, as the night grew darker, and the murmurs in the crowd grew louder, the question began to hang in the air. How long before the truth surfaced, and what would it cost once it did? The crowd around the scene began to swell. Neighbors pulling out their phones, car windows rolling down as drivers slowed to see what was unfolding. The flashing blue and red lights bounced off every surface, painting the street in urgency. Whispers spread quickly, some people insisting they recognized the woman, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The tension was no longer just between the officers and the woman. It had become a public spectacle, a living story unfolding in real time. Every second stretched longer, every sound amplified, every move felt critical. Inside the circle of uniforms, The woman's calm expression contrasted sharply with the officer's rising aggression. She spoke again, steady but firm, her words carefully chosen. The officers, however, dismissed her tone, treating it as defiance instead of authority. This misinterpretation became the real conflict. It wasn't just a physical struggle anymore. It was about perception, assumptions, and the dangerous gap between what was real and what was believed. Among the bystanders was a young law student who had been following cases of wrongful arrests for months. She recognized the deeper implications of what was happening and started streaming live, narrating every detail for the world beyond the block. Her voice trembled with outrage but carried determination. In another corner, a retired veteran watched, silently, his jaw clenched. He had worked alongside federal agencies before, and something about the woman's presence seemed different to him. He didn't speak, but he knew there was more to this story than the officers realized. The lead officer, meanwhile, was under his own kind of pressure. Every decision he made was shadowed by his fellow officers and the growing crowd. His pride, his authority, and his career felt tied to this single moment. Backing down would mean losing control, and he couldn't allow that, not in front of his team, not in front of an audience. He was determined to prove he was in charge, unaware that his actions were pushing him closer to a revelation that could change everything. The woman, though silent now, scanned the crowd. Her eyes caught on the phone cameras, the streaming lenses, the witnesses who would carry this story far beyond the street. She seemed almost resigned, as if she knew the truth didn't need to be shouted, it would reveal itself in time. That composure only deepened the mystery, leaving both officers and bystanders unsettled. As the air grew heavier, an unspoken question hung above everyone present. When the truth finally came out, who would be held accountable and how deep would the consequences run? The noise on the street was almost unbearable, now sirens humming, radios crackling, and the constant buzz of voices from the crowd. Dozens of phones were raised high, catching every angle, every shout, every sudden movement. The weight of the moment was pressing down on everyone, as if something was about to break wide open. The woman stood at the center of it all, her quiet strength creating a sharp contrast to the storm raging around her. She didn't need to shout to command attention. Her presence alone made it impossible to look away. The lead officer stepped closer, his jaw tight, his posture rigid. He barked. Another order, his voice louder this time, trying to drown out the murmurs of the crowd. But the people watching weren't silent anymore. Some shouted for the officers to stop, others urged the woman to comply just to keep her safe, and a few whispered anxiously about what they thought they had seen on that ID card. The conflicting voices fed the chaos, making the air feel electric, charged with the possibility that something irreversible was about to happen. For the woman, every second mattered. She knew that one wrong move could escalate the situation further, yet she also knew her silence couldn't last forever. Her eyes flicked to the ground where her wallet had landed, the edge of her federal badge just visible under the streetlight. It was right there, waiting to reveal everything, and yet no one in uniform seemed willing to look. The officers' tunnel vision blinded them, keeping them locked into their assumptions. Meanwhile, the live stream from the young law student had started gaining traction online. Comments poured in, questions filled the chat, and within minutes, thousands of viewers were watching. Rumors spread fast. Who was this woman? Why was she so calm? And why did it feel like the officers were missing something critical? On the street, the crowd didn't yet realize how quickly the world beyond their block was catching fire with the story. The retired veteran in the corner finally took a step forward, his eyes narrowing at the faint glimmer of the badge on the ground. He hesitated, torn between speaking up and letting the scene play out. His silence was its own kind of tension, another layer to the suspense already gripping everyone. The lead officer raised his hand, signaling his team to tighten their circle. The crowd gasped, sensing the moment was reaching its breaking point. The woman lifted her chin, her expression unwavering, her calm almost defiant. She knew what was coming next, and so did the audience watching from their screens and from the sidewalk. The question wasn't if the truth would come out, it was when, and at what cost. Just as the lead officer signaled for his team to close in tighter, a sharp voice cut through the chaos. It wasn't from the crowd, and it wasn't from the woman. It came from the edge of the scene, where a black SUV had pulled up quietly, unnoticed until now. The door swung open, and a man in a dark suit stepped out, his presence commanding attention. Instantly, he moved with the kind of authority that silenced even the loudest whispers. The officers froze for a moment, caught off guard, unsure of who this stranger was or why he walked so boldly toward the flashing lights. The crowd fell into a hush, sensing something had shifted. The woman's eyes locked on the man, and for the first time that evening, her calm expression flickered just slightly. Recognition? Relief? Maybe? Or was it something else? The uncertainty made the moment even heavier. The suited man raised his hand, flashing a credential so quickly that only the nearest officer caught the full detail. The reaction was immediate: hesitation, confusion, and a visible crack in the officer's confidence. But the lead officer didn't back down. His pride pushed against the interruption, his voice hard as he demanded to know what business this man had here. The answer was cryptic, just enough to deepen the mystery without giving it away. You don't know who you're dealing with. The words cut through the night air, sending ripples of tension through the crowd. Phones zoomed in, trying to catch every second. For the bystanders, the situation had turned into something far larger than a neighborhood incident. Rumors began spreading even faster online, some claiming the woman was connected to federal law enforcement, others convinced this was a cover-up in real time. The live stream chat exploded with speculation, screenshots of the badge on the ground circulating within minutes. The pressure wasn't just in the street anymore. It was multiplying across social media, turning this moment into a national spectacle. Inside the circle of officers, the woman stood motionless, her silence now more powerful than any protest. The SUV and the man in the suit had raised the stakes, and the officers found themselves trapped between two choices: assert their authority in front of the cameras, or step back and risk admitting they had made a grave mistake. The crowd could feel the shifts. Something far bigger was unfolding, and the real story behind this woman was close to breaking open. The night air grew thick with anticipation. Two forces now faced each other, local officers clinging to control and an unexpected presence hinting at truths they weren't ready to face. The street was no longer just a scene of conflict. It had become a stage for something far more explosive, and no one knew which side would give way first. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The crowd leaned in, phones still raised, hearts pounding as if they were part of the moment themselves. The man in the suit stepped fully into the circle, his calm but unyielding voice cutting through the tension. He pointed at the badge still lying on the pavement, half hidden under the streetlight. "Pick it up," he said firmly. One of the younger officers, uncertain and nervous, bent down and lifted the wallet. His eyes widened as he read the credentials, his lips parting in shock. He looked to the lead officer, his hands trembling as he whispered, "Sir, she's the director of the FBI." The words seemed to echo louder than the sirens. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The livestream chat exploded with disbelief. Even the veteran in the corner shook his head, as though confirming what he had suspected. All along, the lead officer froze, the color draining from his face as the weight of the mistake came crashing down. Everything that commands, the force. The dismissal of her voice suddenly looked different under the truth. The woman finally broke her silence. Her voice was steady, low, and cutting. "You should have listened before you acted," she said, her eyes never leaving the officers. The power in her tone was undeniable, not from anger, but from certainty. The moment flipped, instantly control had shifted, and everyone knew it. The officers who once surrounded her now stood frozen, unsure whether to step back or to stand their ground. The man in the suit took another step forward, pulling out his own identification. "This incident is over," he declared. The words carried authority, not just as an order, but as a warning. The crowd erupted, people shouting, phones streaming, the story already spreading beyond anyone's control. But just as it seemed the conflict had reached its end, another twist unraveled. From the back of the crowd, a second SUV appeared, identical to the first. More suited individuals stepped out, their faces serious, their movements deliberate. They weren't there to protect, they were there for her. The director's eyes narrowed as she recognized them. For the first time, her calm cracked, if only for a split second. The lead officer's mistake was now overshadowed by something even larger. The question shifted from what had just happened to what was really at play here. The woman straightened, her composure returning, and looked at both groups, local police on one side, federal agents on the other. "It seems," she said, quietly, almost to herself, "this night is far from over." And with that, the climax left everyone hanging between truth and a deeper mystery. Unsure of what the next revelation would bring, the street had fallen into an uneasy silence, broken only by the hum of engines and the low murmur of the crowd. The presence of the second SUV made it clear that this was no ordinary confrontation, and even those who had been filming lowered their phones for a moment, trying to process what they were seeing. The woman, the director of the FBI, firmly, her eyes shifting between the officers who had tried to control her and the suited agents now approaching with purpose. It was clear that this night had grown far beyond a misunderstanding at a traffic stop. The lead officer, pale and shaken, finally stepped back, his voice faltering as he ordered his team to stand down. The young officer who had picked up the badge quickly handed it back, his face filled with guilt and embarrassment. In that small act, the balance of power fully returned to the woman. She slipped her ID back into her wallet, but she didn't leave. Instead, she faced the crowd, her words measured and deliberate. She reminded everyone that authority comes with responsibility, and that really listening can prevent disasters before they happen. Her tone wasn't angry, but it carried the weight of truth. The suited agents from the second SUV stopped a few feet away, exchanging quiet words with the man who had arrived first. Whatever was discussed, it ended quickly. They gave a sharp nod, then turned back toward their vehicle. The director's eyes followed them until they left, her calm demeanor returning once again. For the bystanders, it was one more reminder that there were layers to this story far beyond what they had just witnessed. The law student who had streamed the incident looked down at her phone in awe as comments poured in by the thousands. She had wanted to shed light on injustice, and now she had captured something even more profound, a moment that exposed how fragile perception can be, and how quickly judgment can cloud the truth. The retired veteran finally stepped forward, saluting the director in quiet respect, a gesture that said more than words could. As the officers slowly dispersed, the woman gave one last glance at the lead officer. There was no triumph in her look, only a reminder of the cost of assumptions. Without another word, she stepped into the SUV that had arrived first, the door closing softly behind her. The vehicles pulled away, leaving the street in stunned silence. In the days that followed, the story spread across headlines, news broadcasts, and endless social media debates. It became a lesson about power, identity, and the dangers of acting without understanding. For those who had been there that night, the memory would never fade. And for the world watching, it left one undeniable truth. Sometimes the most ordinary moment can reveal the deepest flaws in how we see each other. And sometimes, it takes just one unexpected revelation to change everything.